This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Rowan Quinn. E haere aki nei, an Auckland GP accused of incorrectly prescribing ADHD drugs is found guilty of professional misconduct. Police Minister Chris Hipkins feels the heat over retail crime. Another day, another blocked Wellington road. This time it's Transmission Gully during the morning commute. The city's new mayor and former activist Tory Whānau joins us. We're in Hamilton West. Will voters stick by outcast former Labour MP Gaurav Sharma? And we'll speak to one of the butchers behind the country's top sausage. You can watch us live on Facebook, Freeview Channel 50 and Sky Channel 83.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Ahi Marie, good afternoon. Ko Evie Ashton Themne. A High Court judge has decided teenage rapist Jaden Meyer will remain on home detention, but has given a scathing review of how the case was handled. Meyer, who's now 18, was found guilty in July of raping 4 girls, all aged 15 at the time, and guilty of sexually violating another in 2020 and 2021. Amy Williams reports.
In a judgment today, Justice Fitzgerald said the 9-month home detention sentence was plainly manifestly inadequate, and the Crown prosecutor had erred in failing to seek a term of imprisonment. She says the District Court judge's sentencing exercise lacked transparency, which in turn undermines public confidence in the administration of justice. Last week, the Deputy Solicitor General sought leave to appeal against Jaden Meyer's sentence of home detention in favour of prison time, 6 weeks after the appeal deadline. But Justice Fitzgerald says the interests of justice were best served by declining that application.
An Auckland GP accused of incorrectly prescribing Ritalin and other ADHD drugs has been found guilty of professional misconduct. Dr Han had earlier told the hearing his care for his patients motivated his actions. The prosecution argued that no matter what Han's intentions or expertise were, he shouldn't have broken the rules. The medical disciplinary chair, Royden Hindle, delivered the unanimous verdict, saying Tony Han would be sanctioned.
Having considered the charge, the evidence and the submissions pursuant to Section 100 of the Act, the Tribunal finds that Dr Hanna is guilty of professional misconduct in respect of each and all of the particulars of charge.
The hearing has adjourned while parties prepare for penalty discussions. The leader of the ACT party says he's worried the new terror laws could be too wide-reaching. The government wants to pause the 3-year expiration on the imprisoned terror entity designation, which freezes the person's assets and makes it a criminal offence to support their activities. The Christchurch mosque shooter is the only designated terror entity currently serving a prison sentence. David Seymour says this type of law is made for the worst cases.
But I suspect that in the future we're going to have to review how this law is extended to other people in other circumstances. There's an old saying that lawyers have, hard cases make bad law. It's a very hard case, but it doesn't justify making a bad law.
However, David Seymour says he's leaning towards supporting the bill because the Christchurch mosque shooter needs to be controlled. Auckland's Mayor-elect says Auckland Transport needs to completely change its approach to better serve its communities. Wayne Brown this afternoon released a letter sent to the acting chairperson of AT, Wayne Donnelly. In the lengthy letter, he says Auckland Transport needs a complete change in approach. Mr Brown says the agency needs to include local boards on project decisions and improve systems instead of committing to new ones. He also wants to remove unnecessary road cones and road closures and establish rules over the use of footpaths, cycle and bus lanes. Wellington's new mayor says a protest group should be directing their frustration at government instead of disrupting the capital city. The Restore Passenger Rail group have blocked roads around Wellington 5 times in the last week, today locking up part of Transmission Gully. The mayor, Tory Whānau, says she supports the group's key message, which is that passenger rail should be urgently restored to reduce emissions. But she says it's disrupting Wellingtonians instead of the people who can make that change.
I have to speak on behalf of Wellingtonians and the impact made on our city, especially when it's not us who are the ones that can make a change, it's central government. So we just need to direct that frustration to the right place.
Tory Whānau says she feels conflicted condemning the protest, but there are more effective ways to get the message across. In sport, Silver Ferns captain Emiliano Ignacio feels their depth can help them wrap up a series victory in Netball's Constellation Cup. Up 2-0 in the series, New Zealand can retain the trophy by beating Australia in Melbourne tonight. Coach Dame Nolene Taudua hasn't made a lot of substitutions so far, but Ignacio has faith in those who have been sitting on the bench.
I believe we've got a heap of depth there as too, and if we do have to turn to it, which I think we will, that they'll be ready to go as well. And I believe, we've just got heaps of firepower there.
Tonight's test starts at 9:30 and the Black Caps get one last chance to hone their game before their T20 World Cup opener when they play a final warm-up match against India tonight. The clash in Brisbane comes ahead of Saturday night's sold-out match against hosts Australia in Sydney. Batter Glenn Phillips says they have a simple focus.
Making sure that guys get enough time on their feet but also enough time of rest, because we need to be as fresh as possible going into the SCG on. So it's crucial just to get that balance right, making sure that the guys have had enough time in-game as well as enough time of rest to come out firing.
Tonight's game starts at 9 o'clock. That's the news.
Protesters close roads.
They were singing old train shanty tunes. Got my ticket ready, train is going to come, that sort of thing.
A road trip classic drives a bidding war.
I'd always thought, I wonder what would happen if I framed a cheeseburger and chips.
And a love song for State Highway 35.
Taking the high road. Morning report, weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
And we're on air on rnz.co.nz and on the RNZ app on your mobile. You're with Rowan Quinn next on Checkpoint. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Thursday. From Northland to Whanganui, including Coromandel and the Central High Country, a few showers. For Bay of Plenty, Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, mainly fine. A few afternoon and evening showers for inland Gisborne and Hawke's Bay. From the Manawatu to Wellington, also for Waded Upper, a few showers clearing this afternoon. Cloudy periods tomorrow with afternoon showers in Manawatu. Fine for Nelson. For Marlborough and Canterbury, fine apart from isolated showers this afternoon and again tomorrow evening. Bulla to Fiordland, showers turning to rain for a time around evening with thunderstorms possible and snow above 900 metres in Fiordland. Showers clearing south of Hokitika tomorrow evening. For Otago and Southland, showers this afternoon and evening, a few may be heavy. Fine at first tomorrow, then showers from the afternoon with southwesterly winds gusting 90 kilometres an hour about the coast. And for Te Kohu, the Chatham Islands, fine, showers tomorrow evening. It's just gone 7 minutes past 5. Our next news headlines and traffic is at about 5:20.
Thanks, Evie. Kia ora, this is Checkpoint. I'm Rowan Quinn. An Auckland GP accused of incorrectly prescribing ADHD drugs has been found guilty of professional misconduct. Tony Han was charged with prescribing without the approval of a paediatrician or a psychologist. During the hearing, he told the Medical Disciplinary Tribunal his care for his patients motivated his actions. He said he worried about the consequences of untreated ADHD for those who couldn't get help. The prosecution argued that no matter what Han's intentions or expertise were, he should not have broken the rules. Well, Darren Ball is the chair of ADHD NZ and he joins us now. Kia ora, Darren.
Kia ora, thanks for having me.
What's your reaction to the verdict here?
ADHD New Zealand understands how the tribunal came to the verdict, and we don't support GPs operating outside the regulations, but we do absolutely support making changes to improve this system. We're sad. It's sad it's had to get to this, and we know how hard Dr. Han has advocated for his ADHD patients. And his patients and the community will be sad and upset about this decision as well.
What is it that's so tricky about the rules that you would like to see change, or why you want to see them changed?
The key is two parts. The first is getting access to a diagnosis. And we do support the system of a GP in calling in a specialist like a psychiatrist or a paediatrician. The problem is that only from our research, 28% of GPs understand ADHD, and like with all the pressures on the mental health system, there's not enough people to talk to ADHD patients or people who think they have ADHD.
So is this potentially leaving people, without help because they have to wait a long time or have to pay a lot of money to get it?
Yes. And through Radio New Zealand's work in December, we became aware that 5 district health boards, as it was then, were unable to help adults with ADHD. And when you can't get that help, you're in crisis. And that's what worries us.
What's been the reaction from people in your community or people with ADHD? Have they been getting in touch with you today after the verdict?
Oh, they certainly have, and our social media groups are upset and sick of it, to be honest. There are ADHD people who have ADHD, are sick of being stigmatised. They're sick of finding it hard to get the support that they need, and they just see this as a system fighting back against them. And then, of course, there are those who have gone to Dr. Hahn, and we're aware that he might have 800 patients now, and they're worried about what does this mean. In East Auckland, there is very little in support of psychiatrists, both publicly and privately, in terms of their availability right now, and they're worried about that. So that's saddened as well.
What do you think will happen to those 800 patients of his now?
I would hope that there's some proactivity and from both sides where perhaps they connect with a specialist now in preparation for when they need to see them, as well as the medical side proactively reaching out and trying to make that connection. Because we know that in parts of New Zealand there's a 6 to 9 month waiting list. If you can't get access to your medication, you could have problems. And our research tells us this, being successful at work, successful at relationships, and there's also a heightened issue around mental health. Canadian research talks about untreated ADHD adults being 4 times more likely to commit suicide than an adult without ADHD. So things like this worry us.
And there has actually been huge interest in this case. Do you think that could have any impact on, the moves that are already afoot to look at changing that rule for the such heavy specialist and regular specialist recommendations to be able to get the ADHD medications?
Yeah, there are moves afoot, and we were heartened by a hui in August with all of government health as well as the colleges. And so there are moves afoot. And I think what this serves as a practical example of what is needed and how fast we need to move. And I'm heartened by the support we're getting, and I'm hoping that in the next 18 months there will be changes.
Look, thanks very much for joining us tonight. That's Darren Bull, who is the chair of ADHD NZ. And you're with Checkpoint. It is 12 minutes past 5 here on RNZ National. We're keen to hear what you think about this story, this issue. Text us on 2101 or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Police Minister Chris Hipkins has faced the heat from beleaguered business owners in Auckland today, demanding less talk and more action on retail crime. Shopkeepers say relentless ram raids and burglaries are costing them stock, staff and sleep. Data from the police backs them up. It suggests the problem is continuing to increase. Katie Todd has the story.
It only took seconds on Tuesday morning for Quick Pick's convenience store in Mission Bay to transform into what the manager Zed Ayub describes as a disaster zone. Thieves smashed down the glass door, beelined to the cigarette cabinet, set off the fog cannon and fled.
All the smoke filled up the whole shop and they just fell down and grabbed some ice cream and ran away.
Quick Picks now has the temporary wooden plywood doors that have become symbolic of the country's retail crime wave. Zed Ayub says the store's fog cannon and security cameras haven't been enough to stop smash and grabs from happening time and time again.
It's been, I think, six times throughout 2 years.
Today, members of the Darien Business Owners Group met the Police Minister Chris Hipkins in Auckland, an earnest face-to-face plea for him to do more to help them. 10 ram raids are happening each week on average, according to data supplied to National by the Justice Minister. That's trending above the last figures the police supplied to RNZ, which showed about 8 ram raids a week in the 12 months until July.
We need to agree that there is a crime emergency in New Zealand, which we have put very clearly to the Minister.
That's the Dairy Owners Group Chair Sunny Koshal. Chris Hipkins today preferring a slightly different description for the situation.
An escalating pattern of youth offending. You can put whatever label on it you like. If you're a business that's a victim of that, then clearly that is an emergency for your business.
But acknowledging the group's concerns.
That is, absolutely a genuine concern, and one that we absolutely acknowledge. We respect those businesses. We respect the level of concern that they have. We're absolutely committed to working with the small business community to make sure they can feel safe in their businesses.
The Dairy and Business Owners Association says they want a small fraction of the taxes they contribute to go towards just that, keeping them safe. Ideally, they want the government to work with councils to set up more streetlights and security cameras. They say the $6 million fund set up in May to help stores beef up their own security is simply too small and too slow. It should be $30 million, they say, and distributed at pace. So far, in 5 months, just 7 retailers have successfully had new bollards, cameras, screens and security equipment installed through that fund. 5 of those were part of the pilot program.
I'm focused on getting the $6 million that we've currently got spent because I think we really want to see faster progress there, and we're starting to see that progress accelerate. It has been too slow to get up and running, and I absolutely acknowledge that.
Then there's the consequences for those carrying out the crime. Since January, there's been 251 prosecutions and 104 youth referrals for ram raids. Shop owners say that clearly hasn't been enough to break the cycle of crime and get repeat offenders off the street. The owner of SuperValue Parkwood in Hamilton, Manish Thakar, knows what it's like to feel powerless while being targeted.
We are helpless. Last week, one lady came and took away all trolley load of stuff. We were just yelling, yeah, you can't do that, you can't do nothing.
Chris Hipkins today promising a real focus from the government on interventions for young repeat offenders. He says it's time to try new things to get young people out of crime and back on the straight and narrow. It's a lengthy and expensive wish list that the dairy and business owners have left with Chris Hipkins today. Now they want words to become actions.
Former Labour MP Gaurav Sharma announced his resignation from Parliament yesterday in a move that'll trigger a by-election in his former electorate, Hamilton West. Dr Sharma spoke with Checkpoint this afternoon about his future in politics. Our reporter Tom Taylor and cameraman Nick Munro also went to Hamilton to see what his constituents make of the situation.
Gaurav Sharma says that since becoming an independent MP, he has been able to raise issues he never believed he could as a Labour MP, questioning the party on crime, health reforms and immigration. However, he claims the Labour Party could have put a stop to this questioning.
Members of the New Zealand Council called me in confidence to let me know that, the party and the Prime Minister are looking at removing me from Parliament, but within 6 months of the general election, so they don't have to hold a by-election. But at the same time, they don't want me sitting there at the back asking all the questions, all the hard questions, and holding the government accountable.
But Dr Sharma says he'd already considered starting his own party even before hearing of this alleged plot.
And there was a possibility, could I go back to Labour? But, as things have progressed, I thought about, is there a potential here to have another party?
Despite his ambitions, Dr Sharma says the most important part of a by-election will not be winning, but simply being able to run.
The message I'm trying to send here is that as a common man, I am not going to be shut down. I'm not going to be silenced, because that's what the government has been trying to do for the last 2 months.
On the streets of Hamilton, residents say they don't know what to believe.
I feel like there's little bits and bobs of it that we don't really know about completely. That's all. It's just, I don't know. We don't know the full picture, do we?
I personally just don't think he's had a fair go. It's my opinion. I know what it's like to be bullied. and I feel that he was, and he wasn't given the opportunity.
I think it's all about him. He needs to be deferred to. You've got to curtsy and sort of say, can I speak to you, please? And I think in a democratic society, people treat him equally, and it's sort of, he's come from a medical background where he's been deferred to all the time, and suddenly, some young office girl says, no, you make your own coffee.
The by-election Dr Sharma triggers could cost the taxpayer up to $1 million. But some Hamilton residents say they're not worried.
We've spent money on more bigger things, haven't we, than just a by-election. I mean, let's look at the flag referendum, for example. No one batted an eyelid at that at the time.
We saw Prime Minister backed people in the local government elections, which would have triggered a by-election anyway, had they been successful.
But when it comes to deciding who to vote for, some residents are doubtful about Dr Sharma's future.
Do I think I'd vote for him? No, I don't think so. No, I wouldn't. No. Full stop. No.
No, waste of time. He only got in because of Labour.
It'll be worth seeing just, because the local body elections are a real slap in the face for Labour. So this is going to be the test of what is going to happen at the election. Because usually they would get a third term. And are they going to? That's going to be the test. And this is going to be a real, Rorschach test for what's going to happen for them in the future, I think. And so it's going to be fascinating. So yes, it's worth the money. Pay up.
Dr Sharma says he has decided on a name for his new centrist party, but won't reveal it yet. In the meantime, Checkpoint asked some Hamiltonians for their suggestions.
That's entirely up to him. It's not my party. But good on him. It shows that there are other avenues to have your say.
The non-bully party, the cuddle party, I don't know, something for them to change parties, something for the mood of the times in the country, probably. Yeah, if you need something zippy, I don't know, the vape party, because they may go up and...
It's 5:20 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Kia ora, e te iwi. Coming up, we speak to Wellington's Mayor about the ongoing protests in her city. Don't forget you can text us on 2101 and you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, Facebook us or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It's time for the headlines now with Evie.
Kia ora, Rowan. Auckland GP Dr Tony Han, who was accused of incorrectly prescribing Ritalin and other ADHD drugs, has been found guilty of professional misconduct. Chair of ADHD New Zealand, Darren Ball, told Checkpoint Dr Han's patients and the community will be saddened by the outcome and says changes are needed to improve the system. A High Court judge has decided teenage rapist Jaden Meyer will remain on home detention but has given a scathing review of how the case was handled. Meyer, now 18, was found guilty in July of raping 4 girls, all aged 15 at the time, and guilty of sexually violating another in 2020 and 2021. The government wants to pause the 3-year expiration on the imprisoned terror entity designation, which freezes the person's assets and makes it a criminal offence to support their activities. But leader of the ACT Party, David Seymour, says the new terror laws could be too wide-reaching. Auckland's new mayor has released a letter sent to the acting chairperson of Auckland Transport, in which he says it needs a complete change of approach. Wayne Brown wants to remove unnecessary road cones and road closures and establish rules over the use of footpaths, cycle and bus lanes. And a man has reversed his car into Japan's oldest toilet. The communal loo at Tofukuji Temple in Kyoto dates back to the 15th century. Police say its ancient door was ruined after the man hit the gas without realising his car was in reverse. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic in the central North Island, a crash between Taupo and Tūrangi in the Waitetoko beach area has now been cleared on State Highway 1 and traffic is moving normally. And there are roadwork closures on Auckland's motorways tonight, including a full closure of State Highway 1 between Silverdale and Puhoi in both directions from 10 o'clock. Check before you hit the highway tonight in Tāmaki Makaurau. Our next news headlines and traffic are at 5:40.
Thanks, Evie. The Silver Ferns can retain the Constellation Cup with a win over the Australian Diamonds in Melbourne tonight. We're joined to talk about this by sports reporter Felicity Reid. Hello, Felicity. So what would a win tonight, what would the significance of that be for the Silver Ferns?
Well, for the Silver Ferns to keep hold of the Constellation Cup, they need to back up those 2 wins that they've had in New Zealand with a 3rd win against Australia. The last time they actually had 3 consecutive wins against those Trans-Tasman rivals was 16 years ago. So if we cast our minds back in sport history, that's a team coached by Ruth Aiken and captained by Adine Wilson. So that was quite a long time ago. This is a 4-game series, so they do have 2 opportunities to wrap up the title. But if it ends up at 2-2 with New Zealand 2 and Australia 2, it goes down to points differential. So, of course, they're probably going to want to wrap that up tonight. And their Diamonds under a bit of pressure, extra pressure. It's the first time at home in 3 years for them. So tonight's game in Melbourne, first time at home in 3 years. The last time that was a game against New Zealand, and there were only 3 Silver Ferns who are in the current team now who actually played in that series, and that's Emilia Anikinoccio, Phoenix Karaka and Tapaya Selby-Rickett. And for the Silver Ferns today, they've actually added in a couple of new people from the series that was here in New Zealand. For the Australia leg, we've got defender Ali Temu and mid-quarters Maddie Gordon and Kimiura Poya joining up with the team tonight as well.
And has there been any update on the sponsor standoff with the Diamonds and their dress code?
Yes, since we last spoke, that sponsor standoff, there has been an update. The Diamonds won't be wearing that dress with a Hancock Prospecting sponsor on it tonight. Netball Australia did put out a statement saying that it wasn't actually a requirement during the Constellation Cup series against New Zealand. Just a little bit of backpedal on what we'd heard previously. Although on Monday, Netball Australia chair Marina Go did actually step down from the role with some backlash, and they don't seem to be backing down from this either. Wendy Archer, who now steps into the chair role, she put out a statement saying that they Netball Australia do wish to continue with the mining giants of Hancock Prospecting and will continue to work with them. They're trying to set up a meeting between the Diamonds playing group and some representatives from Hancock Prospecting to try and bridge that gap a little bit as well.
Sounds like a watch this space situation. And cricket, the T20 Cricket World Cup's getting closer, but the Black Caps have had a few losses in the last few weeks. Should we be worried?
Well, so that final of the tri-series against Pakistan, we had a loss. And then the first official warm-up game for this World Cup in Australia was against South Africa. That was a 9-wicket loss for New Zealand. So the Black Caps only scored 98 in that game, and South Africa quickly got that in the 12th over. I mean, in that match for New Zealand, Martin Guptill top scored on 26. He's not a player that we've seen a lot of. He wasn't used much during that tri-series. And also in this game, South Africa used 8 bowlers. So there was probably a bit of experimentation going on, and maybe the alarm bells don't need to be ringing quite yet. We do have another warm-up game tonight against India in Brisbane. So maybe tomorrow the alarm bells need to ring if we're not getting so well out of that. But this is a tournament which has actually already kicked off for the so-called Minnow Nations. In the first round, Namibia actually upset Sri Lanka by 55 runs. This is a massive, massive achievement for a country that actually only has 9 cricket fields, and their captain in his time away from cricket is actually a lawyer.
Amazing. We all love a good underdog story.
We do.
Yeah. Thanks very much. That's our Felicity Reid, sports reporter there. Well, economic stress is taking its toll on the housing sector, with mortgage brokers concerned potential repayment increases will seriously stretch household budgets. It's widely expected the Reserve Bank will keep lifting the official cash rate, with latest inflation figures showing price rises are not easing. Jonty Dine reports.
The prospect of yet more interest rate rises is going to cause serious pain to the pocket of many homeowners. It is something Sarah Ruffle is not looking forward to.
We've only been in our current home since the start of June, so we're fixed until May on 4.75%, but I've definitely been keeping a close eye on the official cash rate and the changes in the interest rates. I think currently, if the interest rates stay as they are, we're going to be looking at an extra $100 a week on our mortgage.
A rise in her mortgage repayments will put pressure on the household budget.
If you add on another $100 a week in mortgage repayment, it's kind of at the point where we'll have to start looking at where we take that money from.
Ms Ruffle says their whānau are looking at alternatives, such as tiny homes.
We both work full-time. I think we'll definitely be struggling. Yeah, it'll be harder for us for sure.
President of the Homeowners and Buyers Association of New Zealand, John Gray, says he is seeing a perfect storm of rising interest rates and falling sales.
There's huge anxiety in the marketplace amongst homeowners that are now facing significant increases in their mortgage repayments. and a lot of them, would be otherwise considering selling their property to try and relieve the pain, but of course it's a difficult time to sell as well.
Mr Gray says many homeowners are actually in a negative equity situation.
A lot of the value being lost in existing properties that have mortgages over them, and we have certainly seen members suffer significantly as a result of the falling values.
With the traditional route to home ownership out of reach for many, some are taking alternative paths. Amy Stevens is the founder of Slice, a shared home ownership platform which helps facilitate first home buyers into the market.
I bought with my partner at the beginning of this year, and because I own with someone else, I'm less concerned in that together we're quite comfortably able to service what we've taken on in terms of lending.
She says with shared home ownership, a rise in mortgage payments is less daunting.
Putting that money into a mortgage that, yes, might be costing more is at least an investment as opposed to rent, which is also increasing as a result of inflation.
Mortgage advisor Bruce Patton says the biggest issue for homeowners is that inflation is higher than expected.
Which means it's likely rates will go higher than expected, and the flow-on effect is going to be more cost for all mortgage holders, really, right across the board.
He says he has been fielding a number of inquiries from clients about when they should fix, but he says this is like asking the length of a piece of string. Mortgage expert Mike Whitaker says a lack of disposable income is preventing first-home buyers from even getting on the market.
Inflation doesn't seem to be the major problem for people to buy houses. The lack of 90% lending is the major problem. We're turning away 3 or 4 or 5 a day because they just don't have 20% deposit.
He believes bureaucracy is proving a barrier to home ownership and would like to see more 90% lending from the banks.
It's 5:30 and you're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Time for business news now with Nona Peltier. And Nona, we'll stick to that housing theme we've just been hearing about from Jonty. There's a strong labour market. Now that could have an impact on falling residential property values. What's the research telling us about that?
Yeah, so this is research by CoreLogic. They do an update regularly. This was their third quarter report. And what they found is that because we have a very tight labour market, people are likely to hang on to their jobs, and if they lose their job, they can probably find another. And that's the difference between now and in the past, say the global financial crisis when prices fell, but also jobs were in short supply. This is a different situation in that people can still find work so that they can still pay their mortgage. Hopefully they can still pay their mortgage. Even if they can't, banks are doing an awful lot to help people through these times. And so there's other ways that you can manage it, perhaps by extending your mortgage and so forth. So it's a different situation. And as a result, it's expected to put a floor under the price drop, because at some point people will say, well, I don't have to sell my house. I have a job. I can afford to pay my mortgage, so I'm not going to sell at a fire sale price. So that's the expectation that sooner or later, probably maybe the middle of next year, prices will start to level off, just at the same time that interest rates are probably about to peak. So we'll see what happens, but it's not as dire a situation as some would probably feel.
We
need
a little hope, Nona.
That's right. A little hope goes a long way.
Yeah, the Financial Markets Authority, now they've issued another warning about a failure to comply with anti-money laundering requirements. So what's behind that warning?
Well, okay, so for about the last 9 years, we've had anti-money laundering and anti-terrorism related to terrorism. So basically, you can't move your money around. It's the way that you can protect economies from criminal activity. So New Zealand has fairly strict rules in place, but in line with what we see internationally. And the FMA has been monitoring different sectors of the economy, different financial service organizations, with the view to cracking down on any lack of compliance. And what they have found is that there's a particular company, InvestNow Savings and Investment Service. That's an online type of do-it-yourself investment service. We've seen a lot of those recently. And there's also been a number of warnings to these types of organizations because they don't have the processes in place that they're required to ensure that the people they're doing business with are actually who they say they are. And so the Financial Markets Authority has given these folks a formal notice and said, come up with a plan by the end of this month on how you're going to deal with things. In the meantime, customers who don't have all of their information in order are going to find that their transactions are going to be frozen in the meantime. So until this particular firm gets the information they need, people who have not provided it or won't provide it won't be able to continue operating an account. There you go.
And the markets, Nona, what's happening?
Yeah, well, look, we ended up nearly 0.2%, so pretty good day. That was a 69-point gain to 10,917. And the New Zealand dollar, it's been around 57 US cents today. Right at the moment, about 56.9 rather, 90.1 Australian, so over that 89 mark, which we've been looking at for a while, and 50.3 British pounds, so back into the 50s there. And that is really what we've seen in Asia and stronger markets. But we're not out of the woods. There's always going to be some more news somewhere in the world that's going to affect our currency. So we'll be back tomorrow with more.
You will. Thanks very much, Nona. Well, another day, another road. Wellington's Transmission Gully ground to a halt today, but not for the reason you'd expect. For the 5th time since last week, a protest group wanting to restore passenger rail has blocked a main highway, calling for the government to urgently reinstate the transport network. Kirsty Frame has the story.
Got my ticket ready. Don't you want to come? Oh yes, I want to come.
Restore Passenger Rail members today took their sights north from Wellington City, blocking commuter-riddled Transmission Gully. Kapiti resident Scott Taylor was driving to work around 8 o'clock this morning as it unfolded.
Basically, there's two vans that have, before the Hayward turn-off, have really gone really slowly, completely come to a stop and completely blocked all the traffic. And I've been sat here for 25 minutes and I've moved. So, yeah.
He says it's causing disruption to the city.
This is probably my 4th day that I've been late in the last fortnight. So everyone has their own opinion, but end of the day, it's a nuisance.
Since last week, the group have brought 5 Wellington highways to a halt. Just yesterday, 2 protesters abseiled down the Mount Victoria Tunnel, temporarily closing the road. A total of 25 arrests have been made since their first blockade, plus trespass notices from all motorway gantries. Today's protest group were aged between 21 and 81. They arrived in 2 vans before stopping and blocking traffic, sitting across the southbound lane until police arrived. Restore Passenger Rail is adamant they'll keep going. Spokesperson Rosemary Penwarden says they're on a mission for one thing.
Getting something in place here in New Zealand that is going to protect us all, because what's coming is like the COVID pandemic 100 times. It's the biggest change we as humanity have ever faced.
The group want a face-to-face meeting with the Transport Minister to urgently restore the passenger rail network the country had years ago. But the Minister has no plans to meet with them.
There's a lot of goodwill towards rebuilding our rail network, and that's what our government's doing. This group is doing nothing to advance that cause. All they're doing is creating a dangerous situation for themselves and enraging Wellingtonians.
Seasoned Indigenous climate activist Sina Brown-Davis believes the group is doing more harm than good. She says the group went against advice from other activists.
They were told by a group of pretty well seasoned and experienced activists that these tactics would backfire on them. What my worry is now is that the public backlash against these tactics will encourage the government to clamp down on climate protests.
Climate Minister James Shaw says that's highly unlikely. He says there is a risk the group's tactics are unproductive.
I absolutely understand the frustration why people want to make these protests. I can completely get that. The thing for me is, what is the most effective way of ensuring that you're building the kind of mass movement that actually causes real change to happen?
The 11 people who blocked Transmission Gully appeared in the Porirua District Court this afternoon, charged with trespass and criminal nuisance.
Well, new Wellington Mayor Tory Whānau is no stranger to protests. The former activist told me the protesters should be taking their fight to Parliament.
As many people know, I'm an activist myself. I've participated in many protests, and I certainly support the key messages that this group is putting out there. But I must speak on behalf of Wellingtonians. I don't agree with the nature of some of the protests, especially the blocking of our motorway. It has actually significant impacts on our residents, on our commuters, and our businesses, so people just trying to get about the city. What I would just strongly suggest is direct that frustration at the right people, which is central government. March on the steps of Parliament. Stunts are a legitimate form of protest, and that's great. But I just have to. We must think about who we're actually impacting here. We've got to bring people on board, and I think these type of actions are probably having the opposite effect.
Are you or anyone from the council in touch with these protesters to try and get some of that message across to them?
There've been a couple of emails to my office and just trying to talk it through. I feel and hear their frustrations, and that they're probably not happy that I've made the comments that I have. But look, I have to speak on behalf of the city. There are certainly ways that we can push for meaningful action without impacting Wellingtonians in this way.
Do you feel a bit personally torn about having to kind of come out and take this stance?
I absolutely do, to be honest, because when it comes to these types of protests, especially anything to do with climate action, look, I am torn, and I almost feel guilty in a way telling people not to do that. But I'm in a very particular role now where I have to speak on behalf of Wellingtonians and the impact made on our city, especially when it's not us who are the ones that can make change. It's central government. So we just need to direct that frustration to the right place.
What do you think, can anything be done to appease them? Are you trying to do anything to help in that space? Because they say they're going to keep going.
I suppose I'm trying to get that direct message to them, is to, look, I'm happy to advocate for you in whatever capacity that I can, and also push for this with central government myself. I'm a big rail fan. I'm pushing for light rail through our city because I think it is certainly one of the best ways we can do to lower emissions across our country. So I'd be happy to be a voice, but it's just, especially for this sort of topic, but there's not a lot Wellington City Council can do, and there's certainly nothing Wellington residents can do.
What sort of feedback have you had, or has the council had, about the action over the last few days?
Not a lot, to be honest. I know we've had a lot of frustrated residents, but and that's certainly been, we've seen a lot of that on social media, but certainly nothing directed to this office.
Are you worried that someone's going to be hurt or injured in this kind of protest action?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially when you're dealing with, with our roads and drivers, and I don't want our protesters getting hurt. I see they were abseiling off the tunnel, which is certainly one way to do that. But I'd hate for someone to fall. I am concerned about safety.
And what would be your direct message to them?
My direct message is, I hear you, and I agree with what you're, trying to put out there. And look, I'd love to be able to, share it in whatever platform I have. But oh gosh, I've got myself tied up here. My direct message is, I hear you, I agree with you, but let's just find a better way to get that message through to central government. There are more effective ways.
Wellington Mayor Tory Whānau there. It's 17 minutes to 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Kia ora, e te iwi. Coming up, the winner of the country's best sausage. We'll try to get all the secrets to a perfect snag. Don't forget you can text us on 2101 and you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, Facebook us or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Anei a iwi me ngā pito kōrero.
Tēnā koe, Ron. The Defence Counsel for a doctor accused of incorrectly prescribing Ritalin and other ADHD drugs says today's guilty verdict is disappointing. Dr Tony Han told the hearing his care for his patients motivated his actions, but the prosecution argued that no matter his intentions, he shouldn't have broken the rules. The leader of the National Party says there are many philanthropists and charitable trusts wanting to invest in good causes, and the party's proposed social investment fund will get that money into community organisations to buy the country better outcomes. The Prime Minister isn't making any comment after the man convicted of threatening to kill her has had his conviction overturned. Ethiopia says its soldiers have seized 3 towns in the northern Tigray region from forces it's been fighting in a civil war that has left tens, if not hundreds of thousands dead. The region has been under blockade for 17 months with no banking, telephone or internet services and no media access. The European Union's top diplomat, Josep Borrell, has sought to clarify remarks in which he compared Europe to a garden and the rest of the world to a jungle, denying they were racist. And a region devastated by Hurricane Ian in the US last month has seen a surge in cases of flesh-eating bacteria. Lee County has recorded 29 illnesses and 4 deaths from the bacteria, which lives in warm, brackish water and enters the body through open cuts. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic, it appears all traffic is moving normally in all directions all across the country. Our next news and weather is at 6.
Thanks, Evie. And lots of feedback coming in on the Auckland GP found guilty of professional misconduct after he prescribed ADHD drugs without sign-off from a specialist, as the rules dictate. HJ has been in touch to say, I was diagnosed as an adult with ADHD, but had to go privately as the public system said they don't diagnose adults. I'm lucky that I had the money to do so, but others don't. Getting a diagnosis is hard and getting our medication is hard too. Another texter says, New Zealand is decades behind Australia and Canada, and we're paying an enormous social cost in terms of impacts on families, failed education, crime, unemployment, lost productivity, health and quality of life. The future costs of ongoing failure to address these issues will be staggering. And one more, the doctor that he was found guilty is appalling. He was a knowledgeable professional, this texter says. He helped patients who would have difficulty getting care otherwise. One less GP with an already buckling health system short of GPs. Keep it coming. You can text us on 2101 or email us checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Jacinda Ardern says her party is the underdog in the Hamilton West electorate. A by-election has been forced in the seat following the resignation of Gaurav Sharma. Labour leader Jacinda Ardern says the contest will be tough, partly because Dr Sharma has tainted Labour's reputation in the electorate. Here's our political reporter, Katie Scotcher.
After a tumultuous saga, Gaurav Sharma has officially quit Parliament, his resignation taking effect from midnight.
Well, I just feel relieved. I've just got to move on to the next step.
The shock move, he claims, was to preempt Labour using the waka jumping legislation to oust him.
Members of New Zealand Council from the Labour Party have been talking to me and they have said that the party's next step is to remove me as a Member of Parliament, but they want to do it at a time when it is 6 months or less from the general election, which means there will not be a by-election.
Labour leader Jacinda Ardern is adamant that was not the plan.
We had no intention of using the waka jumping legislation.
But Dr Sharma pressed ahead with his decision regardless, triggering a by-election in Hamilton West. The electorate is a bellwether. The contest for the seat could prove a litmus test for what's to come in next year's election. Hamilton West has traditionally swung to the majority party. National held the seat for 4 years before it was won by Dr Sharma in the 2020 Red Wave. With recent polls showing National and ACT could have the numbers to form the next government, the by-election is Labour's to lose. Ms Ardern is already lowering expectations.
In recent times we have been the underdog in that seat, and I do think it would be a very robust and tough by-election.
If If Labour fails to win the seat, Ms Ardern and Labour's campaign chair, Megan Woods, say it won't be a reflection of the government's performance.
We've had a Labour member who is not left on good terms, and that does not reflect well for the local constituency there.
Undoubtedly, voters will have a view on how a former Labour member has behaved in that seat, and we're not immune to the flow-on effect that could have.
The by-election will also be a test for the National Party following a series of candidate selection blunders. National leader Christopher Luxon says the party is going to work hard to win the seat.
We're not going to take anything for granted. We're going to make our case to the people of Hamilton as to why they would be better represented by a national representative.
ACT leader David Seymour says his party is considering throwing its hat in the ring.
Our board will meet in the next couple of days and make a decision. I'd say we're leaning towards participating, especially since in James McDowell we've got a very good candidate there.
The Greens and Te Pāti Māori are yet to decide if they'll put forward a candidate, but at least one is already confirmed. Gaudav Sharma.
So I will be running as an independent, and as I've said, my intention is to start a new centrist party, which will be taking part in 2023 in the general election.
It's not yet clear when the by-election will take place. The Prime Minister picks the date. She's waiting for advice from the Electoral Commission and the Cabinet Office.
It's just coming up to 10 to 6. Kia mau tonu mai. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Well, the best bangers in the business have been named at the Great New Zealand Sausage Competition, and this year 2 butchers snagged the Supreme Award. Judges couldn't pick between New World Te Rapa's pork sausage and Zaroa Meat's Aoraki salami. Well, Portia Davis in Te Rapa made the prize-winning pork, and she joins us now. Hi, Portia, congratulations.
Hi, thank you so much.
So, can you tell us about this prize-winning sausage?
Well, I can't give much away, but I can tell you it's 100% New Zealand pork-based sausage and a few little bits of pieces here and there. Not going to give much away, like I said, to anyone.
Fair enough. What is the secret, if you can speak generally, about making a good sausage? What does it need?
100% meat and some fat. Fat is flavour and key.
And any other little sneaky bits and pieces?
If you want to bring out a flavoured sausage, I'd recommend using the flavour that it's used for. So, example, if you're doing like a beef sausage, you'll use beef flavoured flavourings or like concentrates.
And your winning sausage, how does that sell in the shop?
It's our second highest seller. Our first highest seller is our Angus beef sausages, because you can't go wrong with an Angus beef sausage. That won Supreme Award in 2018.
And what sort of, do your customers give you feedback on them?
Yes, we get a lot of customers that give us feedback. A lot of it's positive. Usually we get bad feedback from our sausages that we're trialling. This pork sausage took us about 7 months to perfect.
Wow. And so, are there any, I guess, trends in sausages? Is it the classics that are still going strong, or are there new things kind of that people want?
The classics are still going really strong, surprisingly, but when you start introducing new flavours, those classics kind of become not so classic, but you get a lot of people that are still like, I'll still go for the pork sausage even though there's this flavoured sausage.
And the judges also mentioned that texture is really important. You're saying flavour is key, of course, but how do you what is a good texture, and how do you balance between the flavour and the texture?
So with the texture, you don't want it too rubbery, you don't want it too chunky, you want it like smooth enough for that flavour to be incorporated into the meat when you mince it and mix it. Hand mixing is also key for us at New World Te Rapa.
And what's the best way to cook it, Portia?
I'd recommend slow cooking it in the pan or even in the oven. But if you want to do a nice barbecue, I'd recommend doing it with some friends in the sun during summertime. Get a lot of them on.
And sauce, mustard, or is it just best on its own?
Oh, don't ruin a handcrafted sausage.
Look, thank you so much for that. There's Portia Davis in Te Rapa, who has won the National Sausage Competition. Well, hundreds of roads in Tairāwhiti are in a state of disarray, with some residents unable to move for months because their roads are impassable. This comes after a year of storms and a clean-up bill of in the tens of millions. Our reporter Tom Kitchen has more.
This is Dale Ferris's first time driving on the road from his home in about 9 months. He's one of the only residents in Nuhiti or Marahei, a tiny coastal community well off the main road, about a 90-minute drive north of Gisborne. The road that used to be here is actually hanging about 10 metres down the cliff.
It's quite trying, a bit traumatic at times. You can't get out. You try and keep yourself in condition, but that's a non-event.
When the slip first hit, he couldn't get out for 6 weeks, but eventually he had to try.
Well, I actually navigated a walk track through the bottom section here of the slip, going through the native that had been pushed down. It got a bit gnarly on the other side, quite a steep section, so I cut steps into the bank.
If he leaves home for work, he has to make sure he can get back.
I have to watch the weather because the road is so wet from A to B that I don't want to put myself at risk.
Up the east coast, State Highway 35 and local council roads are still a mess, especially north of Tokomaru Bay, where the bridge across the river was cut in half. Parts of the road have fallen down cliffs and been washed away. Drivers have had to dodge potholes, swerve in and out of single lanes and gravel. Waipiro Bay is a small coastal community off the main road between Te Puia Springs and Ruatoria. Resident Glenn Walker says the road to his place is full of dropouts.
It's constantly getting fixed, but constantly gets wiped out. So there's no, I suppose the fixes are temporary, and that's probably the frustrating part.
Gisborne District Council's Director of Community Lifelines, Dave Wilson, takes me for a drive to the other side of Tairāwhiti, up the back blocks of Te Karaka off the highway to Apōtiki. He says the district's roading network is in a fragile state.
We had the cyclone event that came through in March, which declared state of emergency, caused a lot of damage across the network, and we've had a really wet winter and the network's still moving and sliding around.
We get to a spot far inland from Gisborne near a place called Whakatutu on the way to a forestry block. The road here has washed away down the hill.
The road's in the middle of the slip. Now this one keeps dropping every time it rains, and so what we've got to do is remove the trees that were planted on top.
The council then plans to alter the road to divert the water away, but that's only one problem out of 600-ish across the region. The council says it can't afford to do everything. It's asking the National Transport Agency at Waka Kotahi to help cover costs. Waka Kotahi says that funding's going through the approval process, but on top of that, it has its own problems running the state highway network. Its North Island Maintenance and Operations Manager Jacqueline Henkin has a mantra she uses: it won't be pretty, but it will be open.
We communicate that a lot with the communities around. It is likely that it won't be sealed. It will be a gravel road as such. We will grade it, we will keep it maintained, but until we know exactly what fix we can do, there is no point going in and doing a beautiful new road if it's just going to keep moving.
There's a lot of roadworks, in particular on State Highway 35, and the agency's refreshing a business case for the battered and torn up highway.
Japan now, where there's been an accidental restroom ram raid. The oldest lavatory in Japan has survived intact for about 600 years until now. Conservation workers are trying to repair the ancient toilet after one of their colleagues accidentally smashed his car into the heritage building. The BBC's Peter Goffin has the story.
This is a fascinating and, let's face it, a vital piece of human history. This latrine is part of a medieval Zen Buddhist temple in the city of Kyoto called Tofukuji. It's believed these communal toilets were built in the 14th or 15th century and used by monks for hundreds of years. Basically, there are 2 rows of about 10 big round holes cut into the stone floor over which the users would squat. Not the most luxurious, but let's just say I have used worse facilities in my time. They were also an important source of income for the monks because they would collect their waste and sell it as compost for farming. Now, in historical toilet terms, I'm sorry to say these are relatively modern because the ancient Romans had communal toilets with benches or seats and even had sewer systems that carried the waste away. And archaeologists have found evidence that Mesopotamians who lived in what is now Iraq built toilet seats over their cesspits more than 4,000 years ago.
But now these toilets in Japan are a site of an accident. Just tell us what happened.
Yeah, this toilet building is now a tourist site, not still in use, and it was a conservation worker, as you mentioned, who was in his car. His car was in reverse. He told police he accidentally hit the accelerator and crashed through the big wooden double doors of this lavatory building. No one was hurt, and experts say the damage to the doors and pillars inside can be repaired, but it likely won't be until next year.
And Peter Goffin with that story from Japan. Time now for some of your feedback and more coming in on Dr. Han. He's the GP who has been found guilty of medical misconduct for breaching the rules for prescribing without specialist approval directly to his patients. One of his patients here, Fred, has been in touch to say Dr. Han's diagnosis of me at age 55 was a not guilty moment. The first time I had a reason for my often haphazard and ill-processed decisions. Medication was a game changer, a deep wrong if patients are left in limbo. And another one here, Lawrence, says the guilty verdict of that doctor was disgusting. We live in wartime conditions with the crippled health system. He was a valuable resource. It's unbelievable. Some more feedback saying Dr. Han is a great advocate for people with ADHD. The government needs to wake up to the lack of vital services and support for this group. And a little bit here on the Wellington protests. Congratulations to the Minister for not meeting the rail criminals, says Jim from Waikanai. And someone, Hamish, says the climate activists are raising awareness much more effectively through their actions than the 30 of them could possibly do by protesting outside Parliament.
RNZ News at 6. Good evening. Kia ora tātou. Ko Evie Ashton tēnei. A campaigner for people with ADHD says the case of a doctor found guilty of professional misconduct highlights the barriers for access to drugs such as Ritalin. Auckland GP Tony Han was charged with prescribing without the approval of a paediatrician or a psychologist. He told the Medical Disciplinary Tribunal he was motivated by his care for patients. Darren Bull from ADHD NZ told Checkpoint the rules need to change to make it easier for people to get treatment.
It's sad it's had to get to this, and we know how hard Dr. Han has advocated for his ADHD patients. And his patients and the community will be sad and upset about this decision as well.
Darren Bull says Dr. Han worked with hundreds of patients and their families and helped turn lives around. The Medical Tribunal will reconvene later to discuss the penalty. A High Court judge has decided teenage rapist Jaden Meyer will remain on home detention, but has given a scathing review of how the case was handled. Meyer, who is now 18, was found guilty in July of raping 4 girls, all aged 15 at the time, and guilty of sexually violating another in 2020 and 2021. Last week, the Deputy Solicitor General sought leave to appeal against his sentence of home detention in favour of prison time, 6 weeks after the appeal deadline. In a judgment today, Justice Fitzgerald said the home detention sentence was plainly, manifestly inadequate, and the Crown prosecutor had erred in failing to seek a term of imprisonment. But she said the interests of justice were best served by declining the Crown's application. A man accused of rape told a court today he was blindsided when allegations of sexual abuse were posted on social media. The 25-year-old is on trial for sexual offences against 6 women. Rowan Quinn is at Wellington District Court.
Under questioning by his lawyer, the defendant said he received thousands of abusive messages following the online allegations, which happened before any formal charges. He said none of the messages were from this trial's complainants, nor had anyone, including them, ever accused him of sexual abuse. He became upset when his lawyer asked how the messages made him feel. The defendant said he left his flat the day after the allegations were posted because his address was also publicised. He said that day the flat was vandalised inside with slurs like rapist spray painted on the walls.
Central city businesses in Christchurch are funding their own security patrols in a bid to avoid ram raids which have been increasing around the country. The patrols had been funded as a 3-month trial by the Christchurch Central City Business Association and the Christchurch City Council and will now continue for another 3 months. The chair of the association, Annabelle Turley, says they want to avoid the problems seen in other cities.
They have done a really good job of just helping businesses on the ground, really just stomping out the antisocial behaviour that tends to often happen in cities, and it's been really, really well received.
Annabelle Turley says there's some frustration that businesses feel they have to take the steps themselves. The National Party says its proposed social investment fund will get money into community organisations and buy the country better outcomes. The fund would use data and assessments to identify who and what needs social services the most and then fund those services. Nationals leader Christopher Luxon says there are many philanthropists and charitable trusts wanting to invest in good causes.
Well, it's very easy. You just direct government money into the Social Investment Fund to actually partner with community organisations to deliver improved outcomes. It's not a radical concept, but the idea very clearly is we want improved social outcomes. That's what we are here to do.
Christopher Luxon wouldn't say if those who donate into the fund would get a tax break like they would if they donated to a charity. The head of the UN's nuclear agency is deeply concerned about the recent detention of 2 Ukrainian staff members at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant, which is under Russian occupation. In a statement, the head of the IAEA called it a concerning development that he hopes will be resolved quickly. The comments follow the release of a director of the nuclear facility earlier this week. The European Union's top diplomat, Josep Borrell, has sought to clarify remarks in which he compared Europe to a garden and the rest of the world to a jungle. He denies it was a racist comment. From Brussels, here's the BBC's Jessica Parker.
In a speech last week, Josep Borrell said that Europe was a garden while most of the rest of the world was a jungle, and the jungle could invade the garden. His comments were widely shared and criticised. In the United Arab Emirates, EU diplomats were even summoned for an explanation. But the EU's Foreign Affairs chief believes his remarks were misinterpreted. In a lengthy blog post, Mr. Borrell said his use of the word jungle had no racist or geographic connotations. Rather, it was in reference to a world of power politics.
To sport now, and Silver Ferns captain Emiliano Ignacio feels their depth can help them wrap up a series victory in Netball's Constellation Cup. Up 2-0 in the series, New Zealand can retain the trophy by beating Australia in Melbourne tonight. The game starts at 9:30. The Black Caps get one last chance to hone their game before Saturday's T20 World Cup opener on Saturday when they play a final warm-up match against India tonight in Brisbane. That game starts at 9 o'clock. And the New Zealand men's sevens coach, Clark Laidlaw, has extended his time with the team as their bid to qualify for the 2024 Paris Olympics begins. Since taking over in 2017, Laidlaw has led the side to Commonwealth Games gold and bronze medals, an Olympic silver medal, a World Cup title, and the 2019-20 World Series crown. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Auckland artist Simon Ingram is looking to reinvent the idea of what painting is. He's been connecting software to musicians' brains to make art. Taranaki's eco-gardening grand Tricia Thompson shares some gardening tips, particularly for people with smaller gardens or anyone considering getting a few chooks. And Hayden Donnell will be joining us for Midweek Media Watch. That's on Nights with Karen Hay, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
And we're on air on rnz.co.nz and on your mobile. You're back with Rowan Quinn next on Checkpoint. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Thursday. From Northland to Whanganui, including Coromandel and the Central High Country, a few showers. Mainly fine for Bay of Plenty, Gisborne and Hawke's Bay. A few evening showers for inland Gisborne and Hawke's Bay. From Manawatu to Wellington, also Waded Upper, a few showers that should be clearing already, if not just carrying on for a little bit longer. Cloudy periods tomorrow with afternoon showers in Manawatu. Fine weather for Nelson. Marlborough and Canterbury, fine apart from isolated showers this afternoon and again tomorrow evening. Bulla to Fiordland, showers turning to rain for a time around evening with thunderstorms possible and snow above 900 metres in Fiordland. Showers clearing south of Hokitika tomorrow evening. Otago and Southland, showers this afternoon and evening, a few may be heavy. Fine at first tomorrow, then showers from the afternoon with southwesterly winds gusting 90 kilometres an hour about the coast. And fine weather for Te Kohu, the Chatham Islands, showers tomorrow evening. It's 8 minutes past 6. Our next news headlines are at 6:30.
Thanks, Evie. No mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint. I'm Rowan Quinn. National's health spokesperson Shane Reti says thousands of people are leaving emergency departments early every month rather than wait. Wait times are under the spotlight again because a woman died in June, hours after leaving Middlemore Hospital, rather than face a huge wait. An independent review found the hospital's emergency department was dysfunctional, overcrowded and unsafe, and only seeing half of its patients within the 6-hour target. Health Minister Andrew Little said no major metropolitan hospitals were meeting their ED wait time targets. Well, National's health spokesperson Shane Reti has been speaking about the problems in Parliament and joins me now. Kia ora, Dr. Reti.
Tēnā koe, Rowan. Good to speak with you.
And you said in the House that 5,000 people every month are leaving EDs early. Are there any areas where this is happening more than others?
So there are some EDs which have particular problems, and I just need to say, first of all, this is no reflection on the ED staff. They work really hard. They come to work every day knowing they're understaffed. This is a shout out to them. But what the figures show, there's some EDs that are troubled. What I see at Middlemore, obviously, Mid-Central has got some challenges as well. Those are the two EDs that spring to mind, but looking month on month, every ED has this challenge.
And your figures say that they relate to people who self-discharged. Do we have any insight as to whether they had any treatment or whether they're just looking at the big queues and leaving straight away?
Don't have absolute evidence, but the definition is they are self-discharged, transfer or are admitted. So can't tell on discharge whether they've been triaged, which of course relates to the Middlemore case from the inquiry this week. Can't tell that. All we know is they leave without being seen.
And 5,000 every month, it's a lot. What impact could that have?
Oh, it's got a huge impact because I have another figure that says, because I thought what would be interesting to know, of those 5,000 who leave, 4,000 to 5,000 actually, how many come back in 24 hours? So they were sick enough to be at ED, but they just couldn't stand the waiting time, but they were still so sick they came back within 24 hours. The answer is about 10%. About 500 who can't wait come back to ED because they're so desperately sick within 24 hours.
I mean, it's a very difficult situation, isn't it? Because it's not just emergency departments that are the problem. It's this sort of jam-packed hospitals. So people who are in EDs can't move out into wards, and then you have this sort of clogged up system. Any thoughts on what could be done now to ease things a bit?
Well, you're absolutely right, and that's why ED wait times are such a good measure, a snapshot of the health system, because it measures a failing primary care sector. When you can't see your GP, ED becomes your medical home, and it's a terrible place to be, your medical home. It's not where it should be, but you can't get in to see your GP. At the other end, people can't leave emergency department up to the wards because the wards are full. I mean, on the night in question, June 15, when this tragic case happened at Middlemore, the independent reviewer said there were 94 people waiting for bed placement. They needed to be in a bed. They couldn't leave ED, 94, and the hospital was 98% full. My goodness, that's a whole ward, as the reviewer described it, waiting in ED to try and find a bed in hospital. So ED wait times are a good snapshot of how the whole system is doing, and it's clear the whole system is struggling.
And the government is saying that there's been, a massive COVID year, a massive flu winter, and that has really contributed to things. I mean, do you think that's a fair argument, or is there more at play here?
Look, I think those are contributors, but I'm very wary to blame every bad behaviour and bad choice on COVID, because if we look at that, not particularly just here at the moment, but before COVID arrived, ED wait times were ballooning out. So there's parts of the system and parts of policy choices that are being made that aren't COVID. Secondly, yes, flu has been a contribution, but the statement that it is the worst flu system in living memory is just not possible. ESR data shows that's not correct. So contributors, but I'm very wary to just say, oh, that's just COVID, oh, that's just flu, because there's more to that, and levers the government could have pulled. And you asked what could be done. You know, right now, tonight, the decision could be made to allow internationally qualified nurses to have a day one pathway to residency. Right now, tonight, we could refocus the ED waiting time target. It's not one of the 12 health indicators that Andrew Little announced at the end of last year. We could make it one tonight. So there are levers we could pull today that would make a difference.
Well, thanks very much for joining us tonight. That's Shane Vetti, who is National's health spokesperson. Well, nearly a third of Ukraine's power stations have been destroyed after another day of Russian airstrikes. The BBC's Hugo Bachega reports.
Another morning in Ukraine, another power station targeted by Russia. This one in Kyiv was hit by missiles at around 9 o'clock today. To the west, Zhytomyr was also struck. The governor said an energy facility was hit. For hours, the entire city was without power and water. This is how Russia is responding to military defeats on the battlefield. The recent strikes have destroyed a third of the country's energy infrastructure, according to President Zelensky. Yesterday, the offices of the energy company and this residential building were hit. 5 people were killed here, including a pregnant woman. More and more civilian sites have been hit by Russia in cities across the country, away from the front lines. Attacks like this shake people's perception of relative safety, but they also seem to be part of a strategy to destroy this country's critical energy infrastructure ahead of winter. So what can Ukrainians do? This family has lost almost everything in the war and is concerned about losing even more.
Of course we are worried. We worry for our children because they are afraid of the dark. It's difficult to explain to them what's happening.
Ukrainians have been told to do their part by saving electricity, but Russia's targeted attacks are likely to continue.
The United Nations is sounding the alarm about the unfolding tragedy in Somalia. It's facing the worst drought in 40 years, and the UN says every minute a starving child is admitted to hospital. The BBC's Andrew Harding reports.
We're heading out into Somalia's drought-lands with an armed escort on lookout for Islamist militants. But all we encounter are dying villages. A solitary camel, too weak to stand, marks the entrance to a place called Kahare. A 56-year-old farmer, Ibrahim Shido, takes us to see what's become of his goats. The last of his herd, now dead from hunger. Did you ever imagine your life would end up like this? Never, he says, but when there's no rain, there's no future for this kind of life. And it's not just the animals that are dying. Which is why most villages are emptying fast. Small convoys like this one, setting off in search of food and water. After a long trek, these families have reached the outskirts of a border town called Dolo.
9 days. They have been walking for the last 9 days.
The local authorities have organised tea for the new arrivals. And someone else registers them on a list that's growing by the hour. You get a good idea here of how quickly this crisis is starting to accelerate, with 300 or even 400 people now arriving at this one small camp every day now, and the international aid effort lagging far behind.
There's been a lot of lethargy, actually. Help hasn't been coming. I guess the international community is also looking at other areas where, there's a lot of other things going on in the world as well.
Yeah.
Absolutely. They've been distracted with a lot of other things going on everywhere.
Some aid is reaching some parts of Somalia. So you all have these telephones, these mobile phones now. These women are getting cash from the United Nations sent directly to their phones. A handy system in a country where a long-running conflict makes humanitarian access so difficult. But it's not enough. Right now, the world is providing less than half of what's needed to save hundreds of thousands of lives.
I think we're in a completely unprecedented situation here. So we describe the situation here as completely historic in terms of the combination of climatic and conflict effects in the context of something which is so severe, so protracted. This just needs a significantly different level of response.
That means a massive push now to save Somalia from another famine and a much longer struggle to help it cope with the accelerating ravages of climate change.
It's 18 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. To Australia, where residents in the Murray River town of Echuca have been frantically pitching in to try to build an emergency levee bank to hold back the mighty river. However, if it works, the levee won't protect all the local homes, and owners on the wrong side of the line are less than impressed. The ABC's Oliver Gordon reports.
It's still a race against time here in Echuca as the Murray River creeps up and up. I'm actually behind the levee at the moment in a zone that the residents are calling the wrong side of the levee. Here, floodwaters are already lapping up. They're just metres away from some properties. It's a sunny day today, but rain forecast for the coming days is set to complicate any efforts to keep these floodwaters at bay. We've heard from the SES this morning that in this Echuca-Moama area, up to 2,000 properties could be at risk if major flooding levels are reached, and concerningly that is expected. The latest we have from the Bureau is that the river could reach these major flooding levels as early as today, and by Friday, river levels could reach as high as they did in the 1993 floods in this area, which caused a great deal of damage. It's too early to tell if they'll rise beyond those levels into what could be categorised as catastrophic floods. If they do, that'll likely be on Saturday. A large 2.5 kilometre levee is just one of a few levees that's been built throughout the town. There are some who are behind that levee, though, in between the levee and the Murray River. They're obviously trying to keep the water out of their homes, but they're not holding out much hope. And some are feeling somewhat left behind. I spoke with Ron Myers about his situation.
Not very happy. It feels like we've sacrificed. You put all your money into your house and everything like that, then all of a sudden we could possibly lose it. Like insurance, we're insured, but still that doesn't do anything for you. I'm at the other end of the working scale, so I'm not very happy with what's happened at all.
It's a bizarre thing to look at.
It is. It's phenomenal to see, and to watch the water come. We're all in it together. Echuca's all in it together. We don't want to see anyone go under, but to feel like you've been actually sacrificed, yeah, it's not a good thing at all. It's not.
Presumably they've done this because it's going to have a greater benefit for the whole town. What do you have to say to that?
Well, it will benefit the whole town, except for the people on this side of the town, the houses left here. As I said, we feel like we've been sacrificed, But it's a waiting game now, and we'll just have to see and hope and see what happens. Yeah, in a word, pissed off.
That's Echuca resident Ron Myers ending that report from the ABC. US President Joe Biden has promised to restore abortion rights if the Democrats win big in the midterm elections. Many states outlawed access to the procedure after the Supreme Court overturned the Roe v Wade judgment in June. Here's the ABC's Carrington Clark.
Election day is in 3 weeks, but early voting has already begun in some US states. Joyce Patton was one of the voters lining up in Atlanta, Georgia, to make sure her voice was heard at the midterm elections.
It's not unusual for me to have a split ballot, but, with our economy, our open borders, all of the things that have been going on, it pushes you one way or the other.
Joyce isn't alone in putting the economy at the top of her list of concerns. Polls consistently have cost of living, and more specifically inflation, which is running at 4-decade highs, as the single most important issue for voters. And that's bad news for the ruling Democratic Party, which is being blamed by many for not fixing the problem. At an event in Washington, D.C., President Joe Biden tried to get potential voters focused on an issue the Democrats think is more likely to work for them.
If you care about the right to choose, then you got to vote.
Joe Biden's job as president isn't on the ballot at this year's election. Instead, the full House and 1/3 of the Senate is. The Democrats currently control both chambers of Congress, but according to polling, the Republicans are in prime position to take at least the House and potentially the Senate too. But the president is promising if the Democrats keep control of the House and win more seats in the Senate, then his party will legalise access to abortion to make up for the constitutional right which was stripped away in June.
If we do that, here's the promise I make to you and the American people. The first bill that I will send to the Congress will be to codify Roe v. Wade.
Polls show the majority of Americans were angry when the decision that enshrined the constitutional right to an abortion back in 1973, Roe v. Wade, was overturned by the Supreme Court. Democrats received a jump in support as they railed against it. But in recent months, with inflation showing no real sign of slowing and interest rates being rapidly hiked to deal with it, the economy has become firmly entrenched as the number one issue for voters. Republican Governor of Georgia, Brian Kemp, who is running for re-election, told Fox News that President Biden was a political liability for the woman Mr. Kemp was competing with, Stacey Abrams.
His policies are very unpopular. It's caused 40-year high inflation, a disaster at the gas pump, a disaster at the border. And these are the policies that Stacey Abrams supports. I mean, she wanted to be his vice presidential candidate, and these are the policies that she would bring to Georgia.
President Joe Biden might want to be fighting a different political contest, but for now it appears that the state of the US economy will be the battlefield for this year's midterms.
A female Iranian climber who disappeared after competing without a hijab in South Korea has shown up on Instagram. 33-year-old Alnaz Rakabi apologised for getting people worried. She posted that her head covering fell off inadvertently. Rana Rahimpour from the BBC's Persian service reports.
This Iranian climber has become a symbol for the protest movement for not wearing the mandatory headscarf. Elnaz Rakabi was representing her country in South Korea when she made what appears to be a very public show of support for women back home who are fighting against the compulsory hijab. To the alarm of her family and friends, Elnaz Rakabi then vanished from her hotel. There are reports her phone was confiscated. This post then appeared on her Instagram. I, Elnaz Rakabi, it says, apologise for getting everybody worried. Due to bad timing and the unanticipated call for me to climb the wall, my head covering inadvertently came off. BBC Persian understands she was sent home early, with one theory that the authorities wanted to avoid protesters gathering at Tehran airport to welcome her. In 2020, Iranian chess umpire Shohreh Bayat also refused to cover her hair at an international competition.
I was asked exactly to write an apology letter on my Instagram and to apologize publicly, and I was given a list of things to do.
She later sought asylum in the UK. The biggest anti-government protests in more than 40 years started after the death of a young Kurdish woman in morality police custody for allegedly not wearing her headscarf properly. Human rights groups say at least 200 people have been killed and thousands detained. Women continue to protest, whatever the risks.
US Secretary of State Anthony Blinken says China is pursuing Taiwan reunification faster than originally thought, and a retired Taiwanese military commander warns the island would be unable to resist the Chinese use of force. The BBC's Rupert Winfield-Hayes reports.
The island of Jinmen is so close to China, they used to blast anti-communist propaganda from these giant speakers to people living on the Chinese coast. It all looks peaceful today, a tourist curiosity. But twice in the last 70 years, China has tried to cross these narrow straits. The island is still a fortress covered in tunnels, bunkers and lookouts.
This is the Taiwanese military outpost called Lion Rock, and it's from here that a Chinese drone flew over the top of this outpost on September the 1st, and they shot it down.
The last time Chinese troops tried to come up these beaches, they were no match for Taiwan's forces. But retired Colonel Chen Shuicai says today it would be completely different. Now it's the opposite, he says. The gap between China's military power and Taiwan's is getting bigger and bigger. Their military power is getting stronger and stronger. If Xi Jinping is determined to use military force, then Taiwan can't stop them. In July, Taiwan put on this huge military drill. It's aimed to show how well prepared the island is to fend off a Chinese attack. Instead, critics say it showed how vulnerable Taiwan's forces are to a bigger, more modern, more heavily armed foe. One of the fiercest critics is the man who used to command Taiwan's armed forces.
If we remain unchanged, we will be defeated, certainly, no doubt about it. I urge the government, you got to take action. You have to take action right now. We don't have time to consider or research or study it again and again. The time is not on our side.
Man down, man down, man down! Admiral Lee is not the only one to feel the sense of urgency. Thousands of civilians are joining training programs like this one to learn how to fight if war comes. Like all the young men here, Jay Lai has done his military service, but he says it taught him nothing about real fighting.
No, we didn't learn anything about the rifle or gun, no. But you learn about concept. But I never touched a gun in 11 months.
When you live with a threat so close for so long, it's easy to become complacent, to believe it won't happen. But as Admiral Lee put it to me, no country can rely on the kindness of its enemy.
Well, that's it from us. The Late News team will keep you updated throughout the night. And tomorrow from 5, first up, go shopping with a veteran greengrocer as veggie prices soar. Have a lovely evening.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Kia ora tātou, ko Evie Ashton tēnei. A campaigner for people with ADHD says it needs to be easier for people to get treatment. Dr Tony Han was today found guilty of professional misconduct for prescribing Ritalin without the approval of a paediatrician or psychologist. A High Court judge has decided teenage rapist Jaden Meyer will remain on home detention, but has given a scathing review